So you mentioned other states that have similar legislation. So if we're using the same database for carbon that's emitted per metric ton, whatever it might be, couldn't you get into a situation where they're getting billed for the same metric ton over and over? New York bills at one level, Massachusetts, Vermont, or let's say all 50 states do it. And
the assessment is not based off of how much, the total assessment is not based off how much pollution they're emitting. It's based off of economic damage to the state.
economic damage.
Economic damage.
But
So
isn't there a threshold? It has to be 1 billion tons or so before.
Correct, yes, in order to be a covered company, but the amount that they pay is established as a proportional share of the actual economic.
And these are global companies too that you're going after, or just companies that are located in New Jersey.
They are no more than 82 of the world's largest fossil fuel extractors,
Including international companies.
I would just
And
mention,
hold on one second. Since 1997, you had the Kyoto protocols. Have global emissions dropped or gone up?
that's not perfect, it's my testimony.
So you don't know?
It's not perfect.
It's just a question.
This bill does not have anything to do with emissions.
It doesn't. No, emissions have nothing, so wait, this bill has nothing to do with carbon?
Believe it or not, inside the legislation, written very clearly, it states that the DEP has no additional regulatory authority over emissions. This is about the damage that they've caused and not about emissions.
What is the damage, and if it's not done through emissions? How is it caused?
So there's no additional authority to regulate emissions here. It's about.
That's not what I'm
Right.
asking.
So
Since 1997, so this goes back to 1995, you have the Kyoto protocols, which the U.S. is not a signatory to. Have global emissions gone up or down?
Definitely not pertinent to this conversation, but yes, fossil fuel companies have continued to extract and let emissions into the air since 1995 because we still use oil.
Who's the world's largest carbon emitter nation?
China.
Okay.
That doesn't change the conversation that the United States is also the third largest
Do we have
in the
any
world.
authority over what China does?
No, but this is not about China. Yeah, this is about New Jersey.
And how, again, I guess my original question, how would we avoid double billing for the same amount of carbon emissions? Anybody can answer.
thank you. I would just want to make sure that we know the baseline here is that there has to be under the definition of a covered company, it's 1 billion tons over a period of time, and having a constitutional nexus to New Jersey. So I just want to make sure in terms of just building a foundation of understanding so we know what this legislation does, right? So companies that the treasurer would work to identify which of the 82 companies that exceed 1 billion tons, right? So that's just an underlying reality of when we start to talk about the international, you raised the point that it does cover companies that are based in other states and other countries.
Other countries as well.
Yes. I just want to make sure the record is clear in terms of what.
And then my final question is when it comes to costs. So you testified about CEO of Chevron, CEO of Exxon, I believe accurately saying they do not dictate what the cost is, control it, whatever it might be. But everything is a cost, whether it's the cost of real estate, whether it's the cost of labor, whether it's liability, past, future, whatever have you, it's still a cost. So if they're paying out additional $2.5 billion a year, how is that not an additional cost that a corporation, whoever they might be?
No, it would be a cost. It's a past liability. It's not a forward-moving cost. So that makes a big distinction in terms of how
But they have to
book
pay that
cost.
somehow. They have to generate future revenue.
Right, and I said BP Oil is a perfect example. Look at the books. They put pause on dividends and they sold $33 billion worth of assets during a time that they were paying singularly $65 billion for the Gulf oil spill. Note this bill is $50 billion spread out over 82 companies.
I guess my concern, I mean, you're going to have this, we're one state of many, and then if everybody starts following a similar path, then you could see where any corporation, no matter how large they are, might not be able to pay these bills.
Well, if Exxon was so concerned that they weren't able to pay the bill, you would think they would attend a hearing to say that. That would be very powerful, right? Or or any of the companies that would actually present real evidence to address the real questions that are being raised appropriately by a whole range of stakeholders and legislators in this process. Note they didn't do it in New York and Vermont, and they are now filed briefs which put them on the record, and guess what they don't say in those briefs? that there's going to be a price increase. Nowhere in their briefs to New York and Vermont cases. And you know what? The state of New York and the Attorney General, which of course in New York and Vermont are independently elected Attorney Generals, all have said, just to know because I didn't get to it, that this is constitutional, legal cases. And if you're very interested, I am past the New Jersey bar. In terms of reading those legal briefs, I no longer am an active member, but I love reading briefs on my spare time. So the bottom line is that the attorney generals have put forth very thoughtful brief to dispel, like for instance, it was raised as preemption. Someone said this bill is preempted by Clean Air Act. Note the Clean Air Act deals with regulation. It has nothing to do with damages specifically that were raised before about how the important money that we're dealing with. The Clean Air Act doesn't address that. That's why this bill is not preempted by the Clean Air Act.
I don't think you have to be an attorney to see that if you're billing somebody, that money has to come from somewhere. And if you see U.S. emissions are going down over the same time period, then we're making progress towards the very goal that I believe that you want to see. Lower emissions coming, at least from our country where we have some control.
So this bill is not, like I said, about emissions or lowering emissions as explicitly stated
Are
in the
emissions
legislation.
ever mentioned in the bill itself?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right, so data points are a thing, but emissions are not regulated in this. As mentioned, it does not preempt the Clean Air Act because of that, right? And this is about whether shareholders pay or working class families pay.
But the bill means nothing without emissions. It doesn't. It does not. It doesn't. How do you measure it without carbon? How do you get to that baseline without emissions?
Yeah, both are right? Like the bill specifically deals in terms of how, like I mentioned, to identify a cover company, it deals with greenhouse gas emissions, right? But what Ben is trying to point out, I believe, is that, as noted, the legislation specifically doesn't give any authority to regulate carbon emissions, right? So you're both right.
It seems more punitive than it is corrective.
Well, we believe it's a fair share based on the data, and the economists that were mentioned and the states of New York and Vermont obviously believe that a fair share was $75 billion for the state of New York, and they're actively defending it. I don't think anybody would say Governor Hochul is a left-wing politician. The bottom line is yeah, okay, there you go. I meant New Yorkers.